Hello everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a spoiler review of Eternals. Now you can catch up with my non-spoiler review of the movie and I will leave the link within the description. And just quickly, overall I felt it was very ambitious. It reached certainly for much more higher levels in terms of its concepts and its themes and its ideas. I overall felt that it jammed too much into the movie. We had way too many characters, and despite the fact that it was 2.5 hours, I just feel it didn't execute or handle all of the elements that it was trying to juggle together very well overall. But it was still overall a watchable entry within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now this video here will be far more of a free-flowing discussion on all of the elements that I thought worked well and didn't work well throughout the movie. So just in case you weren't warned before, you'll find a warning now that this will be indeed a spoiler review. So if you haven't yet watched the movie, you may want to check out now, catch up with the movie, and then come back to this overall review. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of this movie is probably the first opening 10 to 15 minutes. And to be honest with you, it's actually a lot of what they showed in the trailer. We get that really opening minute title crawl where we basically are explaining the overall world building without this movie itself, where essentially the Celestial is called Prince Arsham, I think I'm pronouncing that name right, and he is overall the big Celestial that creates both the Deviants and the Eternals. And it's actually established later on throughout the story that he actually created the Deviants first, and that they were the figures that went rogue and that he couldn't control them, which I didn't really buy that, because you're this big massive Celestial and you've created these beings, so normally you'd assume that whatever you create you'd still have some control over him to destroy them if they ever go out of control. But for some reason the Celestial couldn't control these deviant beings, and that's when he had to create the Eternals in order to stop them. So we got this opening title, and I've seen a lot of reaction online. Many people are citing this as a problem because it's not your typical Marvel opening. I didn't really have an issue with it. It's just a standard opening title crawl. I don't really see what was wrong with it. But in general, when you are showcasing much more of an epic, grandiose storyline as the Eternals, for me, I always prefer it when you visualize the prologue part of the story, very much so that what we've got with Lord of the Rings. That's always the go-to example that I refer to in terms of opening these much more big epic storylines. And I think it would have been great if we had saw the Celestial or Prince Arsham, whatever the name was, you know, visually creating these deviants, visually opening up this whole world that we saw within the Eternals themselves. Now, we did get a prologue sequence, or much more of an expositionary sequence, halfway through the film, which the Prince Arsham is talking to Cersei, I believe, and he's explaining much more about the creation of Celestials and how they go from planet to planet, generating billions of lives. And that's what I feel we should have got at the beginning part of the movie, not midway through, just to, like I said, establish the far more world building that we're going to see right throughout this movie. And we had those opening scenes where, of course, we see all of the Eternals saving the people in that historical era. And it was a bit disjointed. It looked even less impressive than the shots what I saw within the trailer. There was nothing bad, but it was nothing particularly special. It just felt very routine and by the numbers. And I think when you're opening a movie, you should really go up for much more of a balls out spectacular sequence, because you want to be able to draw all of the viewers and the audience in. So I just think they could have executed the opening part of the film a bit better. We then started to get an introduction of all the characters. So we meet up with Cersei in London, England, I believe, and she's going to her class seminar. She's a bit late, so her boyfriend Dave Whitman, I believe, who's played by Kit Harington's character, has to kind of fill in for her, and then she takes over, and then they suffer a quick earthquake, and we see her using part of her powers, which she has the ability to change the shape of certain objects. So this is just normal stuff. We're introducing the character overall. Did they include this relationship too much? I think they could have cut it down a little bit, considering again the other wealth of characters that we had to go throughout this movie. I don't think it was quite as important, Cersei's relationship with Dave Whitman, because as the film progresses we centre far more on the romance between her and Icarus, and the supposed love triangle really isn't there as such, because really Dave Whitman can't really hold a candle in terms of comparison to against Icarus. And then we had later on the first emergence of the Deviants in the present day world, where they're walking in the streets of London. And again, you've seen all of this in the trailer where the Deviants are attacking them, and then we see the red bus flip over, and then Cersei changes it to much more of these softer like rose petals. And initially I thought, well, hang on a minute, how many people are in that bus? Now we only see the one bus driver, so of course we assume he was the only person in there. I mean, a bit of nitpicking as such, but And also, didn't you think it seemed a bit sparse in the streets itself, where you had this big hulking deviant running around, and it didn't really seem that a lot of people were paying attention or reacting. So that was just a bit weird when I was watching the scene overall. And this is a sequence where we of course saw Sprite exhibiting her powers, where she's able to create illusions. We had that sequence where we see multiple versions of her and Cersei walking around the streets in order to distract the deviants. So just a routine opening, just again to establish the main threat level. And of course this last sequence saw the entrance of Icarus really popping out of nowhere to help them defeat the deviants, and they established earlier on that these deviants are far more powerful. So the one big talking point that everybody was discussing when we saw the initial trailers is, where the hell were the deviants during the snapping of the universe into existence by Thanos, of course. Now they generally explained it in the trailers that the Eternals can only interfere with the Earth issues when the deviants are involved, and they established this throughout the movie. But one of the big issues I had was that if you go to the halfway point throughout the film, and we have the sequence, I can't remember whether it was in Babylon, we had various flashbacks going back to the historical periods, but you had that sequence when basically there was the beginning of a genocide, and initially the Eternals, they defeat the deviant, and then they stand back and everybody's attacking it, and then they're almost standing up in the big temple as they see all the chaos happening. And then it's Druid, I believe, decides to actually interfere. He has the ability to control minds, of course. So this is where we were getting conflicting motivations here, because we're saying at one point, well, you can only interfere when the deviants are involved, but they established at this point that they defeated the deviants. So at this point, you should be free to do what you want. The Prince Arsham Celestial should be overall happy that the deviants are all defeated, so there should be nothing discouraging you now from getting involved in the world's events if needed. And that's what we see with the Druid character here. So this is one of the big push and pulls motivations that we were seeing right throughout this film, is that do we stand back and observe, or do we actually get involved within the world's events? And if we do get involved in the world's events from this attack on the people here, then why the hell did we not get involved in the Avengers with the Chitauri? It kind of contradicted the early motivation. Now, had they stuck to the Eternals not getting involved in this particular battle here, then it would have made sense. But just having them get involved really undercut all of the credibility that we saw throughout the film, right? Because if you're willing to get involved there would have been hundreds of other issues and outbreaks of war and genocide and attacks throughout the various centuries that you spent on Earth, and you mean to tell me that you're going to kind of just pick and choose when you want to get involved? That doesn't really add a lot of credibility to the characters, especially when we get to the last quarter of the film, when all of the characters are kind of professing their love for the human race. We had that scene in particular between Salma Hayek as Ajak and Icarus Richard Madden 2/3 of the way through the film, where she's basically establishing that she can understand now how much of hope the people are, having spent centuries on there, and that's why she wanted to get involved in the future. So it's just a bit contradictory there in terms of the overall purpose and the themes of the actual Eternals themselves. Another scene that really compounded this issue was the character Phastos, played by Brian Tyree Henry. Now, we established that this is the Eternal that is really the master of all of the technological advanced hardware within the Eternals themselves. Now, he's in the beginning of the movie along with the others in terms of the flashbacks, then he kind of ventures away and doesn't come back again till really the last third of the film, when we are assembling most of the Eternals team, and then we get really much of a detour. And this is something I think again really took away a lot of the momentum away from the film, that we catch up with him and we go to his house, see him with his husband and his kid, and of course this was the big moment, the big LGBTQ representation moment. And as I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, I just thought all of the diversity elements that they were bringing in this movie, they really didn't matter. They had next to no impact whatsoever. And I think Marvel really needs to start toning down this whole push in terms of diversity and representation, because it really is false marketing at this point. But when we meet this character, we get that flashback where we discover that he was actually, if not directly responsible, but certainly inadvertently responsible for the destruction involving the Hiroshima A-bomb. Now, the narrative here was that despite not getting involved with human affairs, they were very much inspiring them to advance their technology. So early part of the movie, he makes remarks when they're in the Eternal ship about building a steam engine, I believe, and building the plow device as well. So again, this contradicts the whole message behind the Eternals, because even if you're not getting involved in all of the battles, by inspiring the humans to build all of these devices, you are getting involved. You are changing the whole trajectory of the history of the race, right? Because culture, history of Earth is very much determined by the technology that we rely upon, as we can very much refer to currently today. And we asked the question as well, how exactly is he inspiring the humans? Because in order for them to build these devices being inspired by him, he would have to show them, right? He would have to literally teach them how to use the devices. Is he giving them blueprints or designs on how to build the new technology? How exactly is he teaching the humans to build all of these devices? They didn't really establish that very much throughout the film. And as I mentioned with the Druid character before, if you feel you are responsible for such a horrific event as Hiroshima, then shouldn't you really be trying to get involved in other events? There have been multiple international incidents since the Hiroshima A bombing, and you're telling me you're going to sit by and not get involved? Doesn't that make you even less responsible than what you claimed to be before? The whole motivation was that, oh, I want to stay away from all of these events because I can see the cruelty of the human race, so I'm not going to show them anymore about their technology. But all of the bad events were still happening, so that makes you even more culpable by just sitting back and not doing anything about it. I just didn't really buy that motivation. So we go back to the issue that I mentioned before about having too many characters within this film. Overall, we have 10 main protagonists within the team of Eternals. That was way too much, and I'll mention in my non-spoiler review, you really could have cut out at least 5 or 6 characters overall. And when I look at this roster, I believe the key characters that you required for this story was probably Cersei, Icarus. I'm going to say Fina because she's a very skilled warrior, Phaistos because he can build a technology, and then really it's one of the 3 pick out of Kingo, Sprite and Malkari. I think one of the 3 from those 3. I would probably go for Malkari purely because her super speed is very advantageous to the team. So those are really the only 5 characters that I would keep throughout the Eternal setup. You could have eliminated all of the rest, and this would have helped shorten the runtime, and at the same time you could have focused primarily on these characters and their backstories and given us more time in terms of the Deviants themselves, which again was so a disappointment for me because I was really interested in the Deviants of what they were saying and what they were talking about here. But once again, they just turned out to be very bland, generic CGI monstrosities that we see so many often in modern day movies today. The overall design is very complex and they're flowing at such a furious speed, but they end up being just weightless, really, lacking any sense of substance or terror or suspense in terms of a natural threat. And I think that's again what they failed with when talking about the overall Deviants. When we talk again about the characters, and I think in particular I'll talk about Angelina Jolie as Fina. Obviously she's the biggest actress within all of the ensemble cast, so initially you'd think Angelina Jolie is quite a big catch for the MCU to get, even though she really has been much more of a hiatus throughout her career in the last 5 or 6 years. She's still a very established, prominent actress, so I thought Fina was going to have a far more prominent role than what she did. But they really underutilised her. They gave her this dynamic that where she had this, I think this is mad, weary disease, and what happens, she basically has this dark tendency to start attacking all of the Eternals, and it's more of this internal condition and struggle that she is suffering from. And initially what happens is, to remedy this, Ajax has to wipe away all of her memories to stop her from having these constant attacks on a team. Now, I didn't understand why she was constantly attacking the Eternals all the time. That never made sense. I thought it was going to be a case of they were discussing about not getting involved in the Earth's affairs, and the condition of Fina was that she couldn't suppress that urge, and she would always get involved, and they would have to stop her having much more of a ruthless killing attitude in terms of the Deviants, and maybe she would eventually turn on the humans. But she just kept attacking the Eternals team all the time. I didn't understand why. And we had that scene in particular where it's, I believe the name is Gilgamesh, and this is one of the character deaths within the movie where they're fighting off one of the most powerful Deviants, and Gilgamesh is the strongest out of the team. and he's getting attacked, and then Fina is just sitting there. So her overall mad, weary condition, whatever, it doesn't kick into gear. She's just sitting there by the tree looking absolutely terrified as Gilgamesh is getting attacked on. And this never made sense, because surely seeing Gilgamesh getting attacked like this would have triggered even more her more darker, intense rage mode, if you like, and she should have really gone all out to defeat the Deviants. So that never quite made any sense. And Angelina Jolie, she performed the role well for the most part, but she was really on the periphery side of things in terms of this overall role as Fina. And I just think I didn't like that idea of just making Fina really more of this side character having this condition, because she just seemed a bit incompetent in many ways. So that was one death that I feel could have been also prevented. We then come to the big twisting revelation that happens 2/3 of the way through. This is preceded by a conversation on the ship when Kingo goes to Icarus and he tells them that he would fight with him to the bitter end, and then Icarus says, "You don't know who I am in reality," or something along those lines. And then we get the flashback scene when we discover that it was Icarus who was responsible for killing Ajax, who we established her dying near the beginning of the film. Now the reason he did this because Ajax, as I mentioned before, had realised that she actually respected and fell in love with a lot with the people from Earth, but Icarus was very committed to seeing the emergence happen, because of course it would mean the birth of a celestial and potentially build more billions of lives within various planets. So I actually like this element. I think it was a bit of a shocking turn, because to be honest with you, going to the trailers, I thought it was going to be Druid that was going to be the villain, because I anticipated this when I spoke about this film, that because we had 10 characters, surely some were going to die or somebody was going to turn into a villain. I initially thought that Druid was going to be some sort of mole for the Deviants, but that wasn't the case, because it turned out to be Icarus. And essentially we have that very good scene where he pushes Ajax off a cliff so that the prowling Deviants who had been in a frozen lake and had just suddenly thawed themselves up, they would go in and attack Ajax and kill her. Now one thing I also want to mention about this film is the power scaling, because we have various individuals who we deem to be the most powerful. So for example, we see that Ajax is the leader. So initially, to lead the team, you normally associate them to be the most powerful, but we see multiple times that Icarus is just as powerful as her. Druid is able to reject her pleas to not get involved in the fight, and she doesn't really have any complete dominance over the team. Now maybe this was just her being too sensitive and being too attached to them to really try and control them, but I just felt there was some power scaling. Again, we established early on that Icarus is probably the most powerful member of the team, but then when we get to the final climatic fight, or fights rather, we see that Phaistos is able to really hinder Icarus with all of his technological bracelets and restraint. So there was just a bit confusing parts in terms of the power scaling in terms of the team. But going back to Icarus again, I liked the revelation. I thought Richard Madden did okay in these particular scenes. They tried to build it up where following this revelation we go back to his meeting with Cersei, and then we go again to the flashbacks of them being in love and together. I wasn't quite sold on the love story between the two. Again, I don't think it really mattered as such. They were just trying to add more emotional weight to the climax where we get the various villain turn by Icarus. We then talk about the final climatic battle, and again this has brought up a few issues for me, because normally, or the standard template for the MCU is that the team assemble together, or the main hero assembles together to take on the villain in the final act. But the problem with Eternals, we kind of had 3 fights. So on the one hand we had the fight against the Deviant, who had absorbed Gilgamesh and was able to take much more of the humanoid form. We then had the second fight to stop the main celestial, I believe his name was Tiamut, I believe that name is, to emerge from the planet. And then we had the third fight when we were battling against Icarus, and then we had kind of the more fourth fight against Sprite, who had joined Icarus because she was in love with him. Now Kingo said that was obvious. It wasn't obvious to me. I had no idea that she had any kind of feeling for Icarus. It was kind of brought in late at the game, and it really didn't matter overall. It's one thing when you're battling one villain, but when you're concentrating on 3 different battles that are all very separate, not connected to one another, it just takes away the final flow of the film. Now the final act wasn't as crazy, as chaotic as what we saw in Shang-Chi, but I just think again it lacks that overall feel and that edge. I thought the effects looked very good, and you know, the effects in general in terms of the overall heroes I liked throughout this movie. You know, the super speed in particular by Makari, that was very good, and I liked all of the flight scenes with Icarus as well. So I liked the effects for this film overall, and I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, I thought overall the visual effects and the aesthetics and the colours were very good. We had that other scene when Cersei goes to that green portal room that I believe that Prince Arsham had created, because this was showing the origin of the Eternals themselves. And we had that very abstract moment when she's looking at various robot dolls of the construction of the Eternals. So I liked that, and I liked overall the main visual flow of the film itself. So again, this ties back to the overall ambitions and themes that we had throughout the film. So we're quickly just going to talk about the various Justice League comparisons that I made and a lot of people have made throughout this film. So essentially we had a couple of name drops for both Superman and Batman, one of which was, I believe, when they visit Phaistos' house and the Black Kid goes up to Ikaris saying, "You're the Superman," shooting laser bolts from your eyes and flying with a cape, but he didn't have a cape. So again, I don't know what that comparison was. Was this Kevin Feige trying to have some sort of jab at DC? I don't know why at this point. DC are way off the mark in comparison to Marvel. So I didn't really get the reasons for this name drop. I see a couple of fans online getting offended by this. I don't know why. It was surprising, but I didn't really find it offensive. I just felt, why mention it in the first place? So Batman got a couple of name drops as well. And what was also very distinctive, if you look at particular some of the Eternals, Ikaris, Bakari, Fina, they were very much the DC heroes, right? So Ikaris is clearly your Superman, Fina is clearly your Wonder Woman, Makari has the Flash, super speed, of course. So that was also very telling as well. I just find it very funny how, as we got on to this film and we got to the climax and we looked at the very serious, epic tone, these characters were kind of your godlike characters within the MCU, it did give vibes of a DC Justice League. Not mimicking it as such, but there were certain characters that Tony, you clearly felt this is a DC movie. So again, if you're a DC fan, you may feel offensive about that. I didn't feel offensive by that. It did raise the interesting question, what would happen exactly if the MCU did own the DC characters? How would they portray them? I suspect a lot better than what Warner Brothers did for the current DCU. And just building to the final climax, really, I loved the scale where we saw the Tiamat Celestial. We see his big hand and his helmet really emerging from the ground. It was very impressive. I loved all of the large scale that we were immersing throughout this film. And it turns out that Cersei has the final initiative to unite everybody in a uni-mind, I believe that is, where basically you're combining all of the powers of the Eternals in order to trap the Celestial. So she essentially freezes him, and we get those great visual shots where we see the early parts of the Celestial frozen, almost in like an ice cap landscape. So that was very good, very impressive as well. Now, one complaint I also had is the fallout where we see the revelation of Ikaris. Now, we get this moment when Cersei has frozen the Celestial and then she's standing across from Ikaris. Now, I thought we were going to get a climatic fight here because Ikaris has drawn the line. He's overstepped the mark. He's killed Ajax, right? So I thought at this point we should have really got a final fight between Cersei and Ikaris. But we don't get that. We see Ikaris lights up his eyes, so he has the chance to destroy Cersei, but he doesn't. And then he just flies in the sky. So you think, okay, Ikaris, where are you going? And then he just flies into the sun, like for no reason. Now, this was a very much on the nose reference to the fact that Ikaris, as we all know, the Greek mythology, Ikaris, his wings got clipped because he flew too close to the sun. But did you really have to go that far with this iteration here? You know, it made no sense. When I was watching this sequence, I thought, why the hell is Ikaris flying into the sun? What is he doing? Is he killing himself? Is he trying to generate more power? What exactly is he doing? If he flew to another planet, fair enough. But why is he flying into the sun? It just didn't make any sense whatsoever. It was a bit laughable, to be honest, at this stage. I was kind of thinking, what the hell is going on? I think they made a major mistake there. This should have been a final fight, but I suppose we were coming to the end of the long 2.5 hour runtime. We didn't have the time, I guess, for another fight, but that actually would have had a lot more personal weight given the love story that we had established already between Cersei and Ikaris before. So that, I think, was a major mistake behind this movie as well. So then that's it. We come to the end of the film and essentially all of the Eternals are wrapped up together. They're all going away now, back on the ship to go on their mystical adventures. And then we get the revelation when Cersei is talking to Dave Whitman. They're in the park and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the Prince Aslan Celestial transport, I believe it's Cersei, Phaistos and Kingo. And he essentially says, I will spare the planet, but I will wipe away all your memories. So I guess they're not coming back now, for some strange reason. Prior to that, we had a hint by Dave Whitman. He had some sort of issue in terms of his family descendants that he had to tell Cersei, and then they were interrupted by the Celestial. So is that the end of their relationship now? Is that the previous group of the Eternals gone away now and we're not going to see them again? I'm not so sure what's going to happen there. So it really was a strange way to end the movie. It kind of ends abruptly out of nowhere, just really random, and I think it was a really flat point in terms to round off the overall story, but it was just a bit weird in that sense. So then we come on to the final part, of course, the end credit scene. And I didn't get all of the hype, because when we were reading all of the early reviews, they've been very critical of this movie, but everybody was saying the best part or the most exciting part are the end credit scene. Now to me, I didn't get that, because they weren't really that special. So the first one is essentially when we see Fina, Makari, and I believe it's Sprite on the ship, and then we get the emergence of Harry Styles from One Direction, if you are a fan of that band, and he is basically Thanos' brother. And he is the character Star Fox from the comics, and we also see Pip as well appearing as well. Now, I only know Pip from the animated Silver Surfer series. Are we seeing the early remnants of the eventual entry of both Galactus and Silver Surfer, as we've already established the Celestials? I certainly hope so, but we'll wait and see in the future. And he mentions that their friends were in some sort of trouble, but he knows where they are, and we go on to find them. So this is just sequel bait. I'm not sure yet whether we will see a sequel for Eternals. We'll wait and see in the future, but that was nothing special. I mean, I imagine a lot of the audience are thinking, who the hell is this guy? I've never heard of him. So that was nothing special. And then the second end credits is when we go back to Dale Whitman, and following on from his secret that he wanted to tell Cersei, we see him opening up this sword container, and the sword starts glowing, and he's really hesitant to try and touch the sword. And then we hear a voice in the background, Mr. Whitman, are you sure you want to do that? Now, it turns out that this is the voice of Blade, the new iteration of the character being played by Mahershala Ali. And you only know this because Chloe Zhao confirmed it in an interview, right? So if you don't know that interview, then how the hell you know this character was? Surely it would have benefited far better if we actually showed the character of Blade, rather than just leaving it open to suggestion. You know, if this was a phase 1 phase of Marvel, they would have shown him, right? But they didn't, so it was really so what? So what? It didn't matter. And I believe also this is giving hints and allusions to Dale Whitman, who's going to play a Knight character from the Marvel comics. Again, I'm not very familiar, so anybody tell me in the comments. But it was just so what in the end. And I think if I look at overall, Marvel really needs to do a better job in terms of these end credit sequences, because we really haven't had a really impactful one for me probably since Thor Ragnarok, where we saw the arrival of Thanos' ship at the end. So this is hinted to the beginning part of Infinity War, but since then a lot of the end credit scene haven't been that good. The end credits one in Black Widow wasn't that special. The ones in Shang-Chi were nothing to shout about either. So again, they need to really establish where they're going with this universe and start doing things to get us more excited in terms of where the phase 4 and phase 5 is going ahead for the future overall. But for me, I just think overall this film, I'm probably most excited because we did establish a lot of the foundation in terms of Celestials, which look great. So hopefully down the line we will eventually see Galactus, and in particular that goddamn Silver Surfer movie that I think if Marvel gets it right, I think that's going to be absolutely incredible. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most in terms of this overall Eternals film itself. So that's it really. Those are all of the main elements that I talked about in my spoiler review of the Eternals. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you have any other thoughts or feelings about this movie in terms of where it stands in the MCU in comparison to the previous movies, then let me know your thoughts in the comments as well. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.